Sarah Callahan grew up in a modest home in Hartford, Connecticut. Born in 1989, she was the youngest in her family, with an older brother, Jason, till her father was a history teacher and her mother worked as a nurse. From a young age, Sarah stood out for her intelligence and sharp mind, particularly excelling in English and debate. Her teachers often noted how she could break down complex situations with ease, a talent that would shape her future and her greatest challenge. But life wasn't always easy. When Sarah was 14, her parents went through a bitter divorce that left her shaken. The pain of seeing her family fall apart led to a deep fear of betrayal, and she promised herself that one day she would build a strong, loving family of her own. To escape the chaos at home, Sarah buried herself in her studies. Her hard work paid off when she was accepted to Yale University with a partial scholarship. There, she majored in communications and minored in psychology, intrigued by how people connect with one another. It was at Yale that Sarah met David Thompson, a confident senior studying business. He was captivated by her quick wit and warm personality. Their relationship moved quickly, and by the time Sarah graduated, they were already planning their future together. 2 years later, they got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Sarah's career in marketing took off after college, and by the time she was 30, she had become a marketing executive at a top advertising firm. Yet, amidst her professional success, one dream seemed out of reach: having children. She and David had always wanted a family, but they faced heartbreaking struggles with infertility, so the experience brought them closer, or so Sarah thought. In the early years of their marriage, life seemed perfect. They bought a charming 4-bedroom home and spent their weekends renovating it, dreaming of the family they would one day raise there. David's career as a management consultant meant he traveled often, leaving Sarah alone for days at a time. Though it was tough at first, Sarah found ways to keep busy with work, yoga, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. But something changed. David's business trips became longer and more frequent. When he was home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone or stepping out to take calls. As Sarah tried to be understanding, chalking it up to work stress. But as time went on, a nagging feeling grew inside her, a sense that something wasn't right. And their friends still saw them as the perfect couple. They finished each other's sentences, laughed at inside jokes, and seemed inseparable. But beneath the surface, Sarah felt the cracks in their relationship widening. The life she had worked so hard to build was slowly slipping away, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her world was on the verge of unraveling. And the first real crack in their seemingly perfect marriage appeared on their 10th wedding anniversary. David, who had always been thoughtful about anniversaries, forgot the date entirely, and he was away on yet another business trip and didn't call until late that evening. So when Sarah gently reminded him of the occasion, his apology was hurried, distracted. It seemed like a minor slip, but it planted the first seed of doubt in Sarah's mind, one that would soon grow into something far more sinister. The turning point came on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon in April. Sarah had taken a half-day off work to get ready for a dinner party they were hosting that weekend. While rummaging through the guest room closet for a serving dish, she stumbled upon a shoebox she didn't recognize. Her curiosity piqued. Sarah opened it. Inside, she found items that made her heart pound: a second cell phone, a small stack of birthday and Father's Day cards addressed to Day Satati in a child's handwriting, and several photos of David with a woman and 2 children Sarah had never seen before. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled out the photos. David looked happy, even carefree, with his arm around a beautiful brunette. The 2 children, a boy about 7 and a girl around 5, were beaming up at the camera. These weren't vacation snapshots or images taken in a hotel. The background was unmistakably a home, but not their home. Sarah's mind raced. Was this from a long-ago relationship David had never mentioned? But the kids were too young for that. Her eyes fell on a Father's Day card dated just last year. A sinking realization crept over her. This wasn't the past. This was David's present, his other life. He had another family. The days that followed were a blur of shock and disbelief. Sarah turned on the second phone, still active, and found a treasure trove of messages between David and a woman named Jennifer. The texts were filled with affectionate exchanges and the mundane details of family life, school events, doctor's appointments, weekend plans. Every message twisted the knife deeper into Sarah's heart. Determined to uncover the full truth, Sarah turned to the internet. A quick search revealed Jennifer Lawrence, age 34, a pediatric nurse in Columbus, Ohio. Her social media profile was mostly private, but what Sarah could see was enough to confirm her worst fears. And there were check-ins at restaurants and posts about family outings, all during times when David had claimed to be away for business. The reality of David's betrayal hit Sarah like a wave. Their entire life together, the trust they had built, had been a lie. Sarah spent hours piecing together more evidence, poring over David's credit card statements, finding charges in Columbus that he had passed off as work expenses. She discovered a hidden bank account with regular transfers to Jennifer's name. Each new revelation was like another blow. That night, Sarah sat in the dark, surrounded by proof of her husband's deceit. The home that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt suffocating. every memory tainted by lies. But she knew she had a decision to make should she confront David, consult a lawyer, or try to reach out to Jennifer. Little did she know, her decision would set off a chain of events with fatal consequences for more than one person caught in this web of secrets and lies. As Sarah dug deeper, she began to see the full picture of David's secret life. Jennifer Lawrence had met David 8 years earlier during one of his extended business trips to Columbus. So what began as a casual affair had turned into something far more serious, with 2 children and a life that Sarah had never imagined. But this was only the beginning. The choices Sarah would make in the days to come would lead her down a path of betrayal, danger, and a dark truth she could never have anticipated. Their whirlwind romance led to Jennifer becoming pregnant within months of meeting David. At the time, David had been married to Sarah for 4 years, but instead of coming clean to either woman, he made a fateful choice. He began living a double life. He told Jennifer that his job required him to split time between Columbus and Hartford, explaining his frequent absences. To maintain the deception, David went as far as purchasing a modest home in the suburbs of Columbus, using an LLC to keep it hidden. It became a second residence for his other family. Jennifer and their 2 children, Jacob and Emily, believed the lie that their father was a pilot, which conveniently explained his frequent disappearances. To them, David was a loving family man who did his best to be there, despite the demands of his career. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself constantly comparing her life to Jennifer's. She lived in a large, elegant home with David, attending glamorous corporate events, while Jennifer's world was centered around children's birthday parties, Little League games, and quiet family barbecues. The differences between the 2 lives David led were astonishing. With Sarah, he was the polished executive in tailored suits, appearing in family photos from exotic vacations and charity galas. But with Jennifer, he was casual jeans, t-shirts, and afternoons at the park, building sandcastles and pushing swings. Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was this other, simpler version of David the real one? Had her entire marriage been a performance? The David she knew would never have settled for the quiet, domestic life he seemed to have with Jennifer. Or perhaps she had never truly known him at all. As she dug deeper into the details of David's secret life, Sarah's emotions became a storm of rage, heartbreak, and an odd fascination. She couldn't stop thinking about Jennifer. Was she another victim of David's lies? Or had she known about Sarah all along? And what about the children? Innocent kids, unaware that their family life was built on a foundation of deceit. Sarah realized that confronting David wasn't just about her own pain. Her actions could destroy the lives of 2 children who had done nothing wrong. The weight of that realization pressed heavily on her, making the decision of what to do next feel impossible. After days of agonizing, Sarah knew she couldn't keep living a lie. She needed answers from David, and she decided to confront him on a Friday evening when he was scheduled to return from a business trip. That day, her anxiety was overwhelming. She rehearsed what she would say over and over, trying to anticipate his reactions and prepare for every scenario. When David walked through the door at 7 p.m., his usual welcoming smile faded instantly. Sarah was sitting stiffly on the couch, the shoebox and the pile of evidence laid out in front of her on the coffee table. David's face drained of color as he realized that his carefully crafted world was about to collapse. "David, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "I know about Jennifer and the kids. I know everything." For a moment, David stood frozen in the doorway, his expression a mix of shock and fear. But then, almost mechanically, he switched to damage control. He walked towards Sarah, hands out in a pleading gesture. "Honey, I can explain. It's not what you think," he began. But Sarah had no patience left for excuses. The months of suspicion and the days of painful certainty had left her seething. She erupted, her voice shaking as she hurled accusations and questions at him. How long had this been going on? How could he betray her like this? Did he ever truly love her, or had their entire marriage been a lie? David's responses were a blur of apologies and excuses. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. He felt trapped. He loved both families in different ways. He had always planned to end things with Jennifer, but then the children came along. He was sorry, so sorry. As the argument escalated, Sarah saw something change in David. The initial shock and remorse drained from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. When she mentioned the idea of telling Jennifer the truth, David's tone darkened. His voice took on a dangerous edge as he warned her to think carefully about what she was planning to do. Suddenly, Sarah realized she was facing a side of David she had never known existed. The man she had shared her life with for a decade now felt like a stranger capable of anything. And this was no longer the man Sarah had married, the man she thought she knew better than anyone. And this was a stranger, a man capable of living a lie for years and deceiving everyone close to him. For the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of real fear. The confrontation ended abruptly when David, his face twisted with a mix of anger and panic, stormed out of the house. Moments later, Sarah heard his car screech out of the driveway, leaving her alone in the echoing silence of their home, surrounded by the shattered remnants of their life together. In the days following the confrontation, Sarah was numb. She moved through the house in a daze, alternating between uncontrollable tears and eerie calm. She called in sick to work and spent hours replaying the confrontation in her mind. David hadn't come home. At first, Sarah thought he had gone to warn Jennifer or had chosen his second family over her. But as days passed without any word, no charges on their joint credit cards, no calls, no activity on his cell phone, a new worry gnawed at her. Where was David? What was he planning? The man she had confronted wasn't the David she knew, and now she had no idea what he might be capable of. As the silence stretched on, Sarah's worry turned to fear. She hadn't told anyone about what she'd discovered or the confrontation, but now, with David missing and her life in ruins, she realized she couldn't keep this secret any longer. 5 days after the confrontation, still with no sign of David, Sarah finally reached out to someone. She met Emma, David's younger sister, at a quiet cafe. Emma was the only family member Sarah felt close to, and she poured out the entire story: David's double life, the shoebox of evidence, and the confrontation. Emma listened, her face paling as the extent of her brother's deception became clear. Emma's shock quickly turned into concern. She insisted they go to the police, convinced that David's disappearance was serious. Despite Sarah's reluctance, fearing the public exposure of their private tragedy, she agreed. The police took the report seriously. Detective Michael Lawson, a veteran officer known for solving complex cases, was assigned to investigate. He listened closely as Sarah recounted the events leading up to David's disappearance. The revelation of David's secret family immediately raised red flags for the detective. Jennifer Lawrence, blindsided by the discovery, initially refused to speak with anyone. But as the investigation progressed, she had no choice but to cooperate with the police. Her statement painted a picture of a loving partner and father, a man who had never given her reason to doubt his devotion. Yet, the more Detective Lawson dug into David's life, the more inconsistencies emerged. Financial records revealed large, unexplained sums of money being moved between accounts that didn't match David's known income. Yet his colleagues reported that some of his business trips didn't align with company records. The carefully crafted image of David Thompson as a successful, honest businessman began to crumble under the weight of fraud and deception. 2 weeks into the investigation, a possible breakthrough emerged. David's car was found abandoned at a parking garage near Bradley International Airport. Security footage showed David entering the garage, but no cameras had captured him leaving. This deepened the mystery. Had David fled the country? Was he hiding somewhere, waiting for the scandal to pass, or had something more sinister occurred? As the investigation intensified, the strain on both Sarah and Jennifer became unbearable. Sarah, once active in the social scene, withdrew completely, leaving her house only when necessary. Jennifer, struggling to maintain some sense of normalcy for her children, took a leave of absence from work, overwhelmed by the stress of the situation. And their lives were unraveling, and the mystery of David's disappearance only seemed to deepen with every passing day. The chain of events set in motion by Sarah's discovery had already irrevocably altered many lives. But as the search for David continued, no one could have predicted the dark turn things were about to take. Weeks turned into months, and Detective Lawson and his team continued to dig into every aspect of David Thompson's life. What they uncovered painted a picture of a man who had been living on the edge of discovery for years, juggling not just 2 families, but a complex web of financial fraud. Interviews with David's colleagues revealed a pattern of discrepancies in his work history. Simon Reeves, a fellow consultant, recalled instances where David had claimed to be at client meetings that Reeves knew had never taken place. He had always admired David's ability to bring in new business, but now he wondered if those clients had ever existed. David's financial records told an even more damning story. Forensic accountants discovered an elaborate Ponzi scheme that David had been running for years. He had used his position to create fake consulting contracts, then used money from new investors to pay off older ones while skimming large sums for himself. This explained how he had been able to maintain 2 households and fund his lavish lifestyle. As the truth about David's fraudulent activities came to light, many of his former friends and associates found themselves under scrutiny. Sarah, still reeling from the destruction of her marriage, was now faced with the possibility that everything in her life with David had been built on criminal activity. She spent hours consulting with lawyers, trying to understand the extent of her legal exposure. Though she had been unaware of David's illegal activities, she feared that her comfortable lifestyle might have been funded by stolen money. Meanwhile, in Columbus, Jennifer was grappling with her own version of this nightmare. The life she had built with David, the father of her children, was crumbling around her. She was questioned repeatedly by police, with every interaction with David scrutinized for clues. The hardest part was explaining to Jacob and Emily why their father wasn't coming home and why people were saying bad things about him on TV. As the investigation progressed, a clearer timeline of David's last known movements began to emerge. Security footage from the airport parking garage where his car was found showed David entering on the night of his disappearance, carrying a large duffel bag. However, no footage showed him leaving the garage or entering the airport terminal. This led to a thorough search of the parking garage, including areas not covered by cameras. During this search, investigators made a grim discovery. Hidden in a seldom-used stairwell, they found David's duffel bag. Inside were his wallet, phone, and a handwritten note. The contents of the note sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the case. In it, David confessed to his fraudulent activities and expressed remorse for the pain he had caused both his families. He wrote of feeling trapped, of the constant fear of discovery that had dominated his life for years. The note ended with a chilling statement. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. It's better this way. I'm sorry for everything." The discovery of the note changed the direction of the investigation. Was this a suicide note? Had David taken his own life? If so, where was his body? Or was this one final deception in a life full of lies, meant to throw investigators off his trail while he escaped to start yet another new life somewhere else? As the search for David Thompson entered a new phase, the ripple effects of his actions continued to spread. Lives had been upended, fortunes lost, and reputations ruined, but the full extent of the damage was yet to be revealed, and the body count was about to rise. 3 months after David's disappearance, the investigation took a dark and unexpected turn. Simon Reeves, the colleague who had spoken to the police about discrepancies in David's work claims, was found dead in his home. At first glance, Simon Reeves' death appeared to be a tragic accident. He had reportedly fallen down the stairs after a night of heavy drinking. However, certain details didn't add up. Detective Lawson, now leading a task force dedicated to the Thompson case and its offshoots, approached the scene with suspicion. The position of Reeves' body seemed off for an accidental fall, and although he was known to be a social drinker, he was not prone to excess. A thorough forensic examination revealed traces of a powerful sedative in Reeves' system, one not prescribed to him. As the investigation into Reeves' death progressed, a chilling theory began to take shape. Had someone silenced Reeves to prevent him from revealing more about David's fraudulent activities? The timing was certainly suspicious. Reeves had been scheduled to give a more detailed statement to the police the very next day. The news of Reeves' death sent shockwaves through those who had known David, particularly those who had been interviewed by the police or were scheduled to be. The people began to look over their shoulders. What had started as a salacious tale of a double life had now turned deadly. Sarah, already struggling with anxiety and depression in the wake of David's disappearance, became nearly paralyzed with fear. She had never known Reeves well, but the idea that someone connected to David's case had died violently terrified her. In an effort to regain some control, she installed a security system in her home and rarely ventured out. Meanwhile, Jennifer faced her own set of fears. With children to protect, the thought that they might be in danger because of their connection to David was almost unbearable. She considered moving, starting fresh somewhere new, but the ongoing investigation made that impossible. As police dug deeper into Reeves' death, they discovered he had been compiling his own file on David's activities. His home office had been thoroughly searched before the police arrived, but the searchers had overlooked a hidden Satan. Inside, detectives found documents suggesting that David's fraud went even deeper than they had initially suspected, potentially involving offshore accounts and connections to organized crime. The death of Simon Reeves marked a turning point in the case. What had begun as a story of infidelity and financial fraud had now become a potential murder investigation. As tensions rose and fear spread, it would not be the last life claimed by the fallout from David Thompson's web of lies. In the weeks following Simon Reeves' death, a palpable sense of fear gripped everyone connected to the David Thompson case. The police increased patrols around Jennifer's house and the children's school, but this did little to calm nerves. The threats began to surface. Sarah received anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. With only heavy breathing on the other end of the line, Jennifer found her car vandalized, the word liar scratched into the paint. And David's former boss at the consulting firm received a package containing a dead rat. The investigation into Reeves' death led to more questions than answers. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood showed a nondescript van parked near Reeves' house on the night of his death, but the license plate was obscured. Interviews with Reeves' neighbors turned up reports of a stranger asking questions about him in the days leading up to his death, but descriptions of the man were vague and contradictory. As the pressure mounted, cracks began to show in the facade of those closest to the case. Emma, David's sister, had a public meltdown in a local supermarket, screaming at a cashier she thought was staring at her. Jennifer's oldest child, Jacob, was suspended from school for getting into a fight with a classmate who had taunted him about his missing father. Detective Lawson and his team worked around the clock, chasing down every lead, no matter how small, and they were convinced that the key to unraveling the entire mystery lay in the missing pieces of David's financial records. But every time they thought they were close to a breakthrough, they hit another dead end. The case had become a powder keg, tensions rising with each passing day. All it would take was one spark to set off an explosion. That spark came in the form of another shocking death. The second death occurred 6 weeks after Simon Reeves' murder, striking much closer to home. Emma Thompson, David's younger sister and the person who had first encouraged Sarah to go to the police, was found dead in her apartment. Unlike Reeves' death, there was no attempt to disguise this as an accident. Emma had been strangled and her apartment was ransacked. The brutality of the crime shocked even seasoned detectives. It was clear that the killer had been searching for something, but whether they had found it remained a mystery. The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma had been her closest confidant throughout this ordeal, the one person who seemed to understand the complex emotions Sarah was grappling with. Now she was gone, another victim of the chaos David had unleashed. Jennifer, upon hearing the news, made the difficult decision to move her children to her parents' home in rural Ohio. The danger felt too close, too real, and her maternal instincts screamed at her to protect her children at all costs. As the investigation into Emma's murder progressed, a disturbing theory began to take shape. Emma had been compiling her own dossier on David's activities, driven by disbelief, anger, and a desire to understand how her brother could have lived such an elaborate lie. Had she uncovered something that made her a target? The police discovered that Emma's laptop was missing from her apartment, and her cloud storage had been wiped clean just hours before her estimated time of death. Yet whatever Emma had discovered, someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it didn't guess. And the double blow of Reeves and Emma's death sent shockwaves through law enforcement. The FBI was officially brought in, recognizing that the case clearly extended beyond the jurisdiction of local police. Agent Carla Mendez, a veteran of high-profile white-collar crime investigations, was assigned to work with Detective Lawson. As Mendez dug into the case, she began to see patterns suggesting this was bigger than just David Thompson. From the financial fraud to murders, the professional hits disguised as accidents all pointed to organized crime involvement. Had David gotten in over his head with dangerous people, or was he more deeply involved in criminal activities than anyone had suspected? With 2 murders now linked to the case, the pressure to find David dead or alive intensified. However, the man who had managed to lead a double life for years was proving just as elusive in his disappearance. To break through in the case came from an unexpected source. A hiker in a state park, some 50 miles from Millbrook, stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, he found evidence of recent occupation and a wall covered in newspaper clippings. Spooked by the scene, the hiker called the police. When Detective Lawson and Agent Mendez arrived at the cabin, they immediately knew they had found something significant. Hidden under a loose floorboard, they discovered a laptop that would later be confirmed to belong to Emma Thompson. It was the first real lead they had in weeks, and forensic experts began to comb through the cabin and its surroundings. Meanwhile, Sarah received a phone call that chilled her to the bone. It was David, his voice ragged and barely recognizable. He told her he needed to see her to explain everything. Against her better judgment, driven by a desperate need for answers, Sarah agreed to meet him. The meeting point was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. As she entered the dilapidated building, Sarah's heart pounded. She had tipped off Detective Lawson about the meeting and knew the police were surrounding the area, but she still felt terrifyingly vulnerable. David emerged from the shadows, a ghost of the man she had married. His eyes were sunken, and his once immaculate appearance was now ragged and unkempt. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of what had happened hung heavily between them. Finally, David began to talk. His words poured out in a torrent. He spoke of getting involved with a criminal organization years ago, using his consulting job as a cover for money laundering. At first, it had just been about the thrill and the extra money, but soon he was in too deep to get out. His voice broke as he talked about Jennifer and the kids, expressing how he had genuinely fallen in love with his second family. He had tried to keep them separate from his criminal activities, wanting to give them the normal life he felt he could never fully provide for Sarah. As David talked, Sarah felt a mix of emotions washing over her: anger, pity, disgust, and a lingering echo of the love she had once felt for this man. But mostly she felt a deep, aching sadness for all the lives destroyed by David's choices. Suddenly, David's demeanor changed. He mentioned Emma and Reeves, his eyes taking on a wild, paranoid look. "They were getting too close, Sarah," he whispered, panic rising in his voice. "I didn't want any of this. I tried to make it right, but they wouldn't stop asking questions. I had no choice." Before Sarah could respond, Detective Lawson and his team burst through the factory doors, their weapons drawn. The moment shattered as David's frantic expression morphed into one of despair. "You don't understand. You have to listen," he pleaded, but the officers moved swiftly to restrain him. Sarah watched in disbelief as the man she had once known was taken into custody, his frantic pleas echoing in her mind. The weight of the revelations hung heavily between them, a painful reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. David Thompson had been living a lie, and now that lie was unraveling in the harsh light of reality. Stay glued to this channel for more crime stories. Subscribe and drop a comment. Until next time, True Crime Pulse. Thank you.